Well, I just got done seeing Deadpool and Wolverine, and I will start by going spoiler free, and I will eventually slip into spoiler territory. So I will try and give you a warning when I do that. The movie, oh God, how do I even start this? I'll just start by saying I really didn't like it all that much. I had a hard time with it. I previously just watched Deadpool 1 and 2 to prepare for this one, and I have to say it's very similar to the structure of Deadpool 2. And if you liked Deadpool 2, that might be a good thing. I am not a particularly big fan of Deadpool 2, so this having like the same plot structure really was a little disappointing to me. There's a lot of forced comedy in it that just didn't feel quite natural. It's like they were like, this would be a good spot for a joke here, this would be a good spot for a joke here. And I didn't really, I don't know, like you could tell like in the theater, like even at the very beginning, the opening sequence, which I will discuss later on, the all the energy in the theater kind of got like sucked out of the room. There weren't really any big laughs when in the theater I was in. There was probably, I don't know, it was even for like 10 o'clock on a Friday, there was probably like 30 people in there, so it was decent numbers, wide range of people, and you got like chuckles here and there at some things was the most you got. Like in terms of like a theater experience, it was a pretty dead experience with not a lot of like camaraderie or like nobody being like, oh yeah, pointing out at this, pointing out at that. As a matter of fact, it was quite the opposite. When the movie ended, there's a lot of like crosstalk between people. It's like those were a lot of references. It's like, what did that mean? What did that mean? What did that mean? The movie does seem to require the audience to have quite a bit of understanding of like pop culture and especially like the production of certain Marvel events and like or things that have impacted individual actors in their personal lives. So if you don't really know that much about like Marvel production history or the lifestyles of the rich and famous, so to speak, then there might be quite a few jokes and like lines of dialogue that are just so bizarrely placed. Um, how is Hugh Jackman as Wolverine? Well, he's not really Wolverine in this. He's very similar to Cable in Deadpool 2. So the character development from Cable in Deadpool 2 is essentially what you get for Wolverine in this. It's almost exactly the same. Their plots are very similar. They're, like I said, their mindsets are very similar. Their resolutions are pretty similar as well. So I don't know. It was kind of fun to see him in the costume, but he doesn't do too many things that are like traditional Wolverine other than just look like him. So that was kind of frustrating. How are the cameos? I thought they were lackluster, to be honest. I thought the only cameo of substance is the one they ruin in the trailer with X-23. She's the only one who really gets to do anything, and what she does is spoiled in the trailer. So like that scene in the trailer where she's like, "You were never the right one" or whatever. That's it. That's pretty much as far as it goes. There's not much more than that. It's some very shallow level cameos. Like they don't really progress plot. Some are used for like certain jokes, but again, like it's just when you're touting like this multiverse thing, you kind of want it to matter a bit. You kind of want to like give people something cool, something kind of neat to see. You want to see variations on a theme because what's the point of just like, oh yeah, remember this, remember this, remember this, if it's just going to be played, remember this. You're not giving me anything new to latch onto. It's just like, oh yeah, I remember. Like terrible, terrible stuff. Deadpool himself, fine, I guess. The movie, like I said, is not particularly funny, which was so bonkers to me that like the entire like our theater full of people were just not having a good time. So he gets to like run his mouth a lot, and they're constantly being like, he talks too much, he talks too much, he talks too much. I'm like, we get it. You can stop harping on it. We get it. And like, I don't know. It's frustrating because I wanted to like the movie a lot more than I did. And it's long too. So, sitting in the theaters, they even make a joke at one point in the movie. It's like, oh, audiences are used to long run times. I'm like, well, we are, but like, if you've been paying attention, long run times are falling out of favor with people. The soundtrack to the movie is obnoxious. I was really, really bummed by like how many times songs ripped me right out of the movie. I'll discuss one in particular coming up a little bit when I hit spoilers. But I just didn't have fun. I guess the biggest problem for me is I just did not have a good time. And to be fair, I was kind of bored during most of the movie. And the plot itself is not particularly complex or like there's not much to get invested in emotionally. So it's just like a series of events happening, and you're kind of just waiting for next event, which is not a great way to make a movie. And if it is, like, I don't know, it just lacks kind of like drive and purpose. It's kind of like the plot just is like pulling these characters along versus anything actually being progressed forward. It's hard to explain, but when you see it, it's just like, and now this scene happens, and now this scene happens, and now this scene happens, but this scene happens. It's like, okay, but what is like the fallout of the previous scene? Oh, no fallout. Oh, okay, wonderful, thank you. Any character growth? No, not so much. Oh, with the exception of like that X-23 thing, but we already know Wolverine's not going to give up. So it's like, I don't know. I mean, it's probably, there are two scenes in this movie that I think are substantive, if I'm being honest. The Wolverine one at the fire with X-23, which is in the trailer, is probably the second most substantive one for me. There's a part which I will get into spoilers, I guess. Oh, hold on. Let me just wrap it up. If you're going to go see the movie, I don't know. I just didn't really, I don't recommend it, but if you're going to see it with like friends, you might have more fun. But like I said, I was in a theater with like 30 people at 10 o'clock in the morning. So these were people determined to come see the movie, and none of us had a good time. All right. I think I'm going to talk about spoilers now, and I'm kind of going to jump around in no particular order. But I was just talking about scenes of substance, and one of the scenes of substance was the car. There's this part where Deadpool and Logan are traveling in this, what is it, like a Kia? No, it was a Honda. They were making fun of it. And as they were driving, Deadpool lets slip that he actually doesn't have a plan for restoring Wolverine's reality, his timeline. And they get into this argument, right? And Wolverine just lays into Deadpool about all of his failures. And then they're like, I'm going to fight you now. And I'm like, oh, cool. So they get like a pretty good fight, but it's based on like these characters kind of like, you know, holding each other, you know, taking each other to task. And like, you kind of want one of them to punch the other one at this point. So when they start fighting, there's like a little bit of like catharsis and release for the audience. The problem is they get smashed into the dashboard and it starts playing You're the One That I Want from Grease. So here you have what should be like a very cathartic moment for these two to get like their anger and apprehension towards each other off their chest and to like work it out with violence. And it's pretty violent. I like how like the car ends up like splattered in blood and stuff like that, and it's pretty funny. But that's it. Like there's no fallout from it. So when I say it's like has substance, I mean like the fight itself had emotional stakes and emotional resonance, because a lot of the action sequences don't. Especially that opening sequence where he literally digs up Logan's body. Us in the audience, we're like, all right, I guess, yeah, it's a little tongue-in-cheek, it's a little on the nose. And then when they kept like when he's fighting to Bye 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 and they kept cutting to him dancing to it, you could just see everyone in the audience like, why are they cutting to him dancing? Like, he's in the middle of a fight. This doesn't make sense. It doesn't look particularly good. It's just like, I don't know what the objective was other than to try and be like, oh, take a look at this. Take a look at this. And that's kind of the movie, is take a look at this. The plot revolves around essentially Logan being I don't even remember what they said. You know, I saw the movie only like 20 minutes ago and I can't remember what they call him. That's how forgettable this is to me. But he's essentially like the linchpin character for a universe. And since he died at the end of Logan, his timeline is slowly being erased. And because Deadpool's from it, they decided to pull Deadpool from the Fox timeline, you know, and try and give him a place now in the new timeline, the Marvel timeline. And as they're explaining this to him, Deadpool's like, don't worry about it. I'm going to do all this. I will come along on your adventure. I know what to do. And so they go and they suit him up. And then he comes out and he's like, I'm ready to go find like Wolverine and like protect like this timeline. And he's like, no, we're pulling you out of the timeline. Your timeline is going to disappear. Everybody you know and love is going to die. Why would you say that to a man you just gave guns and swords to? What do you think was going to happen? How do you think he was going to take this news? He was thinking that he was here to for great importance, and instead you're telling him everyone he knows and loves is going to die, but he alone can be saved. So he starts teleporting around. They do a montage of finding the Wolverines, and the whole thing is just like, why would you tell the guy that you're going to erase his existence? It's so dumb. It's so dumb, and the villains are so dumb throughout the whole movie. The plot is so stupid. And you know what? They forget their history too, because they're saying the void is like this pocket dimension where they send everything. It's not, because in Loki, which the movie references but clearly doesn't understand its own history, it's the end of time. When you get pruned, you don't go to a dumpster dimension. You go to the end of time. So that is what it should be. So there should be no other way. It's when Cassandra Nova gets her hands on the Time Ripper mystery box thing that can destroy all realities, which is dumb, by the way. I mean, it's essentially like, oh, here's a space laser, only it's a box with like colored plasmas. It's so stupid. She's like, I will destroy every other dimension in reality except for the void. Well, the void is the end of time. So if you destroy everything else, it'll cease to exist. But they don't know this because whoever wrote it clearly never watched Loki. They just knew to reference the smoke cloud monster, which is terrible. It's just absolutely terrible. There's a bunch of like illogical sequences of events in it, and it really is kind of structured like your basic Marvel movie, including a fight with like a faceless Legion at the end, but they think they're being clever because it's a whole bunch of Deadpools. I don't know. It just didn't work for me, man. I had such a hard time in that theater, and like nobody was cheering, no one was laughing. It just seemed like no one was having a good time. The few things that did get like a little bit of a cheer out of people, Nice Pool was pretty funny. A bunch of us chuckled at Nice Pool, but again, like chuckling, like when Nice Pool's like, oh, I can gently push against the fourth wall too, and he turns and faces and goes, the proposal. And like we all chuckled, and Deadpool's like, what, you think that's what I do? That was pretty much the biggest pop for us as the audience. We didn't really, like I said, man, 30 people. None of us had a good time, as far as I could tell. Like I said earlier, specifically now, spoilers for, you need to understand the production history of certain movies. For example, they had Channing Tatum's Gambit in it, which is very funny because he wanted to do that movie for so long, and it just never happened, right? And so he's sitting there doing this god-awful, like, French Cajun accent, and you know Deadpool lays into him about that. You have Jennifer Garner's Elektra, and they're talking about everybody who's died, right? And they're like, and they got Daredevil, and he's like, oh, I'm so sorry about Daredevil, and she goes, nah, it's okay, and he's like, oh, all right, because she was married to Ben Affleck and they got divorced. But if you don't know these things, if you're just walking out of the theater, it's like, what was that about? Well, to be honest, you'd have to remember that line of dialogue at all in this otherwise forgettable movie. But it's like they introduce like some of these cameo things, and they just don't go anywhere. They don't really matter because the movie doesn't really end any different from how it started. And they got a few of their details wrong too. Like when they talked about Vanessa, they were like, oh, you couldn't keep your relationship together with a stripper. It's like, well, she wasn't a stripper. She was a prostitute. And then at the beginning of Deadpool 2, she's ready to start a family with him. Then she dies. Then he goes back and he messes with time. And then suddenly she wants to break up with him because he's not doing enough with his power, or he feels inadequate. And they started with being an Earth 616, where that version of Deadpool applies to be an Avenger, but gets shut down by Happy Hogan. And then they cut to the Fox universe, Earth 10005, I think it was. And he talks about how he was also denied being an X-Man and denied being an Avenger. Well, you were denied being an X-Men in the movies because like Colossus wanted to make you an X-Men, but you kept murdering people. And, you know, eventually like you escaped the prison, and like even they talk about it at the end of like Deadpool 2, you know, Colossus is like, I can't support you because, you know, you're a wanted fugitive and a murderer. And even though he shows up to help him, they all kind of walk off into the sunset. Doesn't change the fact that he still could have been an X-Man. Wade chose not to be an X-Man. So to have this kind of, I couldn't hack it, is just so not true because he chose not to be. So for this movie to say you couldn't cut it as an X-Man or an Avenger, first of all, it's not even the same universe we just saw him apply to be an Avenger in. And yes, he could have been an X-Men, but he chose not to. So to have Vanessa be mad at him about that, to have him feel like rejected about that, it doesn't make any sense. He rejected them. They didn't do their research, and it's so bonkers because these are like kind of the same writers, right? So it's just they get their characters wrong. The plot is like a magic box plot. There's really not that much going on because there's so little to like pull you from scene to scene. None of the action sequences carry weight because you just don't care. Like that's why I said the fight in the car is the one that has like the biggest resonance for me, because they just laid into each other. They insulted each other. Wolverine unloads and says some really harsh things to Deadpool, and Deadpool's like, I'm gonna punch you now. And they get into a fight because it's like you can understand that their rage, their frustration, their anger, their insecurities, that you understand. The rest of the movie, I don't know, just not for me. The plot is forgettable. Honest to God, I don't know if I'll remember having seen this movie 2 weeks from now. I don't know. I could be wrong here. Maybe it's great and I just missed something, but I don't think so. Anyways, let me know what you guys think. Let me know if there's any plot details I missed that I should have discussed. I'm sure there were. Like I said, I only live 15 minutes from the theater, and I've already actively forgotten most of the movie. So, thanks for listening, and I'll catch you next time.